Okay. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar on BrakeAce. So normally what we're doing when we're looking at BrakeAce, we're looking at like how can we brake better and how can we improve our braking to get faster. And what I thought we'd do today is look at like how can we compare the use of different equipment using BrakeAce. So normally what we do is if we have a let's say we have a new suspension setting, we have some new tires, we'll go out and we'll go to a trail and we'll test those and we'll see how they feel. We'll see what we think of their ride, and what we'll do is we'll record the time it takes us to do a segment. So you could use Strava or you could use any kind of timing system, and you can get that time quite easily. But what we don't see when we do that kind of analysis is we don't see what is happening and why we're going faster. So that's actually with BrakeAce something that we can do. We can see like where are these differences actually happening, and that's what I wanted to get into today. So we'll be looking at the parts of the software that we use to improve our riding, and we'll be using those to look at, okay, like where was I actually braking differently using flats versus using clips. So disclaimer here, I am a habitual clips rider. So I ride clips, I would say 100% of the time. So actually for this test, I had to bust out the flats, and they're good flats. So that was some people sent me messages on Instagram like, okay, well, are you using good pedals? Yeah, so they're really good pedals, really good shoes. So like proper setup, but I pretty much never ride them. They're just kind of sitting there. Clips, yep, ride them every time. So what I did for this test session is I took a few days to like get used to the flats again, and just to remember how they feel. And I did a bunch of runs on the flats, and then I backed it up with a run on clips on the same day. So since I already know how to use clips, there was no learning curve there. But I figured, okay, give myself 4 runs on the same trail, or maybe it was 5, something like that, over 2 days, and get used to the flats again, and use that last one as your comparison run, and then compare that to a clip. So that's what I did. And I gotta say, like, flats feel fine. Like going uphill, I feel fine on flats. I didn't have the power meter on the bike that day, the propulsive power meter, as we're calling it. But I gotta say, like, flats feel pretty good. Like if you get a proper set of pedals and shoes. But where I do feel like I'm really lacking with the flats is on these kind of traversy flat trails where you're kind of having to pump along. And that's a little bit like what this trail is. So this trail's, I've done the analysis on this trail before, comparing myself to like the top rider, the rider that has the KOM on the trail. And we looked at like how his braking was different to mine. And I always felt like, okay, if I had to use flats on this trail, I'm just losing time pumping along, because I don't feel like I have that control of the bike. But where it does feel really good is in turns. So since this trail had like a pretty big mix of the different kinds of terrain and features, I figured it would be a really good comparison to see like what the actual difference is with the flats. So, so let's kind of just get into it, and I'll show you the things that I've been looking at. Okay, so like once we upload our data to BrakeAce, this is the first thing we see. And if you've ever looked at something like power meter data or any kind of squiggly line chart, you'll recognize this kind of information. So these squiggly lines go across as we go down the trail. You can see that elevation in the green. We're like kind of going downhill, and there's some braking. The really unfortunate part of this chart for braking is that these squiggly lines don't really mean a lot. So that's actually what BrakeAce does, is it says, okay, like here's that information that you see in those squiggly lines, and we're gonna like make it really usable and really digestible for you so you can understand it. So that's what we'll get into, and we'll look at that deep dive. So I when I was preparing for this webinar, I did this massive deep dive and I was looking at so many kinds of data. I was like, actually, okay, we're getting a little out of hand. So what I did is I picked 3 places on the trail that we can look at to compare flats to clips and those specific differences in there. But so this is actually what BrakeAce ends up doing. It ends up putting all the information on the chart and then making it really easy to understand. So that's what we'll look at today. But before we even get there, one of the things that we can do is obviously we look at time. So we can quite easily select our data range. So if I wanted to look at a smaller section, I could just slide across here and everything would recalculate and I'd have a new data selection range. And I can do that for any part of the trail, any trail. And that's, that's when we want to get into the nitty gritty. Usually what I do is I just highlight the whole descent because there's not usually that much braking on the climb, at least you'd hope there's not. So I've already done that. I've selected that for both rides and this is my flats ride. And right there we have on the left, we have my time. So 2 minutes and 56 seconds. I tried not to pedal a ton on this run, even though that doesn't matter for the braking analysis. So the scores don't care if you were pedaling. But we have that time. And if you go back and watch some of the other webinars that we have on YouTube, looking at the same trail, this is really slow for this trail. And that's because the conditions were basically diabolical. So in New Zealand, we have basically a ton of clay in the area that I live in. And clay, as you know, like when that gets wet, it's basically like ice skating on wheels, and add in roots and it's a pretty big mess. So this is, I think, like maybe 30 seconds slower than my fastest run. But that's okay, because what we're doing is we're looking at our braking on this day, trying to get a sense of like what was happening across the trail. So there we go. We have our time. Cool. But what was happening with our braking? So that's what we have. That's why we have the flow score. So the flow score describes like how efficient I was with my brakes. And that's like our snapshot, if you will, of the entire trail. So I can take this flow score, I can compare myself with pedal to pedal, myself with tire to tire, myself with suspension setting to suspension setting. And I can see then like how efficient my braking is with these different setups. But the beautiful thing about the flow score is I can compare myself to you and you to someone else. And we can start to use that to get a really good idea of what's going on and how someone is controlling their bike. So when I'm doing this basic analysis, at the very first thing, and one of the most descriptive things that we can look at is that flow score. So normally my flow score is something like 30, and zero is going to be your best flow score, and it basically means you're not braking. We're not saying don't brake, but as your flow score gets higher, it's almost like penalty points as you get less efficient with your braking. So it can go, the sky's the limit really with flow score. You could drag your brakes the whole time and it would just keep ticking higher and higher, and that's okay. It's just what we're using for comparison. So this is higher than what it was in some of the other runs, all down to conditions. So my flow score is 55. So let's put that then into context and look at what I did with the clips, and we'll start to see right away. It gets interesting. Okay, so here's me with flats, flow score 55, and then let's open the clips ride. Okay, so here we go again on the left. Look at the time, and I know it's crazy because I'm not a flats rider, but I went faster on the flats, and these were back-to-back runs. So like if you would have asked me like which were you better at riding, flats or clips, I would say, oh yeah, hands down clips. But what BrakeAce is telling me, not only did I go slower with clips, but I also was less efficient with my braking. My flow score was higher. And like I had no idea of this until I opened up these rides in BrakeAce. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Are you telling me that I'm more efficient at braking with flat? And I am. And so that's when I got really interested and figured, okay, I'm going to do a deep dive into this. Okay. So before I get into those maps, I'll just kind of describe to you what some of these scores are. So we're scoring you on modulation, duration, and intensity of braking. So this is kind of another snapshot ride or snapshot score. So you can say, okay, like really quickly, I'm going back up to the top of the hill, or I'm going back out to do this lap. How efficient was I with my braking, and how were my different aspects of braking? So how was my modulation? How's my intensity? How's my durations? So with clips, my intensity score was super low. We're aiming for 100% on all these scores. And my intensity was really low. So that actually has a lot to do with conditions. I was braking really, really heavily every time I was braking. And that's definitely not ideal, because what we want to do is conserve speed. So that's a really good score to look at to get that snapshot of these different realms. We also have health, which is comprised of the different types of events. So every event falls into one category or the other. Some are more healthy, some are less healthy. So we're able to understand that, and we can compare between trail to trail using that, and also effectiveness. So we see effectiveness, for example, go down when it's really wet. So normally our effectiveness is probably somewhere in the 90s on this trail, because in the dry it has really good grip. In the wet, the grip is pretty much horrible and non-existent, so the effectiveness starts to go down. Okay, so what I did is I picked 3 sections that we can kind of like look at in this map. So as we scroll, this is the start here, and then as we scroll across the trail, we can see where every event happens. And it's much easier to look at in this way, because you know, this is how we look at things on Strava. This is how we kind of imagine a trail. And what this does with these maps is it gives us a sense of like, okay, where did that happen? And since normally we're using this to train and improve, this is a really good way to look at it. So one of the first sections I wanted to look at was actually the second turn. So first turn probably doesn't matter as much. That's this one. It's a right-hand turn, so I gotta say, like, right-hand turns are my biggest weakness, but we'll look at this left-hand turn here, and just get an idea of what was happening. So so this is my clips ride, and I braked for 2 seconds on this left-hand turn, which is like, okay, we need to put it into context, but like I was almost 100% on the rear brake, which I was actually surprised about, because normally I'm a little more balanced, but we know, like, when it gets wet, we don't want to use the front brake as much because we're more likely to lose control. So we rely more heavily on the rear brake. So that's what I did. That's what I did here with the clips. So the flow score, we're giving you a flow score for every single event. And this one had a flow score of 2.23. So that flow score kind of adds up as you go across every single braking event to give you your whole flow score for the ride. So let's see what I did with the clips on that turn. Okay, cool. So what I was able to do is still really heavy on the rear brake, but with the flats, I was able to cut down the time of that braking. The flow score was still really high, but it was really nice to see that I was able to cut down the time of that one. So since this one's in a turn, one of the things that we can do is a really, really like heavy deep dive analysis. And because we're doing this apex analysis using BrakeAce. So one of the things that BrakeAce does, let me find that one, is it's finding the apex for every single turn that you do. So you can see the star here, that's the apex. And then it's looking at your braking as you're approaching the turn. So this turn is like pretty much a fully supported berm. So I would say it's a steep berm, which we tend to have a lot of those steep berms here in New Zealand, where you kind of drop in and you're able to get traction and exit. So that's what this was. And left-hand turns are pretty much well, you know, if I had to compare left versus right, I'm going to turn better on a left-hand turn like this one. So with the clips here, I can see what my brake balance was the whole time. You can see like some of the time I didn't even touch the front brake. And that, again, that comes down to conditions. And then what happened was I hit the apex and I was off the brakes, which is great. So it's giving me feedback here that I did a good turn. That green is. That's what the green means. So that's actually really good that I was able to get off the brakes at the apex. That's kind of what you want to see. So let's see what I did actually with the clips. I can't remember. Okay, cool. So pretty much the same thing. I was braking much harder. You can see the red means I was braking. The power was higher. But interestingly enough, I started to use the front brake a little bit more closer to the apex, which is pretty good. So this is where we can get into those like really, really deep analyses where we're looking, okay, like, because this is one of the differences we see with World Cup riders is when they're braking, they're kind of dabbing that front brake as they get closer to the apex. So it looks like what I was able to do is use a little bit more of that front brake to get that traction and then turn. But overall, I was able to brake for less time using the flats. Potentially one of the things that I did is have my feet off, but to be able to do that. But you know, there's difference number one. Okay. Okay, one of the things that I'm less good at is right turns. So what I did is I highlighted a right turn. Let's look at that first with the flats. Okay, so it's this one. So we come across like this pretty technical kind of traversy bit of the trail. So you can see it's like more false flat kind of trail. You can see there at the top as we go across. And then we get into this right-hand berm that's steep, and then, or sorry, a left-hand turn, and then a steep-ish unsupported right-hand berm, which is basically the worst thing that you could ever throw at me. So if you're looking for something that I'm going to do extremely poorly, that's going to be it. And that's this turn here. So we can see that with the flats, I came into it and I was braking for 1.1 seconds with a pretty low flow score. Like that's pretty good considering like my overall flow score for the whole ride. That's pretty good for me on the left-hand turn. And then we get to the right-hand turn and my flow scores, that's pretty high, right? So I'm braking for 2.1 seconds, mostly on the rear brake again. It's intense braking and it's long braking. So I thought that was okay with the, especially with the flats, but then, so let's have a look and compare that to the clips. Okay. It already looks like I'm braking longer there with that first one, and then the second one, this is where it just gets kind of bad. So like the second one, the flow score on the right hand turn is really high. So this is with clips, remember. So like I thought I was gonna kill it with the clips, and I'd already done my braking in the turn before, and then we get to this right hand turn and my flow score is just really high. So it's like 10% of all my braking across the trail. So this was actually a really bad turn for me. And what we can see actually with the clips, so if we kind of look over to the right there, we can see that what's happening is this is showing up as one of my key opportunities. And this is the part of BrakeAce that we're using for training, because we're saying, okay, like you have, I think we have 45 brake events, or oh no, 32 brake events on this whole trail. Like we're not saying if you do 31 of these, you're going to get faster. So when we're using this as a training tool, we're saying, here are the 3 places on the trail. These are your key opportunities. And these are the places on the trail where you can improve your braking the most. So this little tiny section with just 2 turns is showing up as a key opportunity on this whole ride using the clips. So obviously like the braking gets a bit more hectic as we get further down the trail, but it was really interesting to me to see that this was one of my key opportunities. So what we'd do is we'd go back and we'd session this section. And I know for sure like that I'm pretty bad at right-hand turns. So that's what I need to do is go back and session this section, especially in the wet. And obviously, especially with clips, because if we look at the flats ride, this is not showing up as a key opportunity. So that's those turns right there. And actually there are other turns with the flats um, that I could improve more. So this was the other thing that was super interesting to me, was that my key opportunities across this whole ride were completely different between the pedals. And this is something that I've never seen before. So I've ridden this trail lots of times. And with this trail, there's these unsupported little tiny steep turns here. You can see these here. This has never shown up as one of my key opportunities until I used the flat pedals. And the reason it came up is because actually I did way better with the flat pedals in all these other sections, which was also a huge surprise. So that means that as it filtered through my key opportunities, the next worst section and the section that I can improve the most is these little turns. So that was really interesting to me because I did so much better in all these other sections, which was really good. It was really good. And then there's one other section that I wanted to look at, and that's what I'm kind of calling a double apex. So remember, what BrakeAce is doing is it's finding the apex for you. It's saying like, okay, this is where you apexed, not where the apex is. This not where your friend's apex is. This is where your apex is, and that's important to know because when we're working on cornering, we can look at like changing where our apex is, changing where our braking is related to our apex, and looking at ways to get faster that way. So the section I wanted to look at was this one right here. So we're looking at flat pedals on this ride. And so this section, it's like you come out of a few turns, you can see those above it, and then it's like long, pretty straight, and has just a bunch of ruts. And it's pretty scary because it's just so slick and it's really fast. So we want to be able to, when we get to the end of this turn, this is like pretty steep here at the end of it, and there's like a little bit of a catch berm. And what I'm always trying to do is to kind of miss the ruts and not totally get sucked into them, not lose control, not lose speed, and try to take that turn faster at the end. So I thought actually with the flats I did pretty good, and one of the reasons why I did pretty good with the flats, like it's obviously a major braking event, one that I can improve, but with the flats what I did is I took my foot off. So that's one of the beautiful things about using flat pedals is you can take your feet off and turn and get your feet back on really, really quickly and not really have to worry. So you're going straight probably or turning with control with that foot off. Whereas with clips, you're trying to make sure you don't tip over, right? So clips are fine and they're fine for cornering, but once you get that foot off, you're just kind of trying to think of the next time you can get your foot on. And it changes the way that we're apexing in these kind of sections. So I'll find that one. Here it is. So like I said, long straight section. Actually had a nice mix of front and rear brake as we went across, which is pretty good. And then here's my apex, and I was able to get off the brakes at the apex and make the turn, which is basically what you want to see, right? So since it's a key opportunity, I know I can go back there and focus on improving that to improve my time and my flow score overall. But it doesn't look too bad right now. Let's look at clips. And this one was really interesting. So this is the same turn. And what we see here is a double apex. So with the clips, because I had my feet on and I was trying to maintain control, I apexed early and probably to miss a rut, and then I apexed again at that little catch berm, um, which was really interesting. So I was much less efficient in this turn because I spent less time going straight. I spent more time turning, more time braking, and it actually led to a higher overall flow score in this section. So you can see that here. So it ended up being 4.9 seconds of braking, which was pretty major. So obviously with the clips, like I did worse in other sections. So you can see that in these key opportunities, and these were just overall pretty poor. So I guess like it really just leads to the question like, okay, Matt, are you gonna just use flats all the time? And like I've thought about it, like like obviously there are places where I'm better with clips, um, or better with flats, as far as my braking and my turning, and I'm just not sure I can commit to changing to flats full time. So like I said at the beginning, I feel great climbing on flats, and I feel great descending on flats, but I really don't feel good when it comes time to pedal. Like so when you get to those flat traversy sections and it comes time to like throw the power down or even just move the legs, really, it just doesn't feel as good. And one of the other things that I noted between when I went from the flats to the clips in the same day, I noted that as soon as I got onto the clips, I felt like I could pump much better. And that's a really good thing to be able to do, is to be able to pump and generate speed without pedaling. So just by being connected to the pedals, I was generating more speed as I went across the trail. So what we'll be able to do is actually, so I synced up all this data to the video, to the GoPro video, so you can see like where I'm braking. I was talking about like how that felt as I was going across, and it's really good to be able to generate speed with the clips just by pumping, because it doesn't take a lot of energy. Um, but the flip side of that is that by generating a lot of speed just by pumping with these clips, I ended up having to brake more. And so it's like this weird little trade-off where it's like, okay, yeah, I can go a little bit faster with the clips, but yeah, I have to brake a lot differently. And my braking tends to be less efficient with the clips. Um, so I think for me, if I'm going to decide to commit to riding, with one kind of pedals or the other, I'm going to have to figure out like where the actual trade-off is. Like, so is it just a perception of, that feeling and that feeling of being able to generate speed? Because what the data is telling me, and I'm data led, I want everything to be science based. Like, I'm actually slower with clips and I'm braking more with clips. So this kind of information can help to lead to decision. And for me, I think it's gonna have to figure out if this is one thing that I want to commit to. But as we move along and as we look at different ways to test our bikes, we don't want these things to be down to feelings. We want these things to be down to data, and that's where BrakeAce can come in to help you, right? So if say we're not talking about different pedals, we're talking about different suspension settings. So how is my suspension setting changing the way I ride? This kind of thing shouldn't be down to feel, because these are real changes that we can make that change the actual dynamics of our bikes. So feelings are important, but the data is really what we're looking for. We're looking for evidence that these changes are actually doing what we think they are. So we could say, do a few clicks of rebound, go down the trail, look at our braking and see where our key opportunities change, see how our cornering changes, see how our brake balance changes, and bearing in mind our time and especially our flow score, and we can say like, okay, did those 2 clicks of faster rebound make me more efficient down this trail? Like, well, it felt really bad, but I rode way faster. And it's kind of the classic argument, the classic pacing argument, which is one of the most interesting things that we could look at in mountain biking. Smooth is fast kind of thing. And that's where, we've done a webinar on smooth is fast using BrakeAce. You start out slow and finish fast, and you go faster overall because you were more efficient the whole time. So by using this data, we can make better decisions, and we can use that data to lead what we do next. And then we can look for those tiny little adjustments in what we're doing to improve and have a constant evolution to be better. So I think that's what it's all about, is having more fun and riding more and really enjoying the process of getting faster. So that's it for this webinar. Thanks everyone for coming. It's really difficult to organize an international webinar from New Zealand, but we did it, and we'll look forward to the next one. So for the next one, we're going to do hardtails versus full suspension, which I know this has been a constant debate. And so I did this data collection with Jeff Lenoski, who he's a world-renowned free rider, and he was doing race runs on his hardtail and then his full suspension bike. So we'll do a deep dive on that analysis. There's a full video for that on YouTube that you can check out on Jeff's I think just search Jeff Lenoski Trail Boss or something like that on YouTube, and you can see what we did for that video. But then we'll do a deep dive for our next webinar. So we'll see you there. Thanks everyone.